are here in Halloween month with Etona Makaya, Master of Minds and of Men, and of course, Anti-Life Reviews, the only comic review show on YouTube, and certainly the only one that's talking about Halloween-related things. I've already looked, don't go to the search bar. So what are we looking at in October? Well, only Bart Simpsons Treehouse of Horror comics, published by Boingo, and we are going over the first 20. We have 10 in the bag, so please check out those episodes from the past 2 weeks. Today we are going over 11 through 15, which ran at various times between 2005 to 2009. Also, my other show, Mackay Award Reviews, I'm looking at the first 20 Treehouse of Horror episodes, so please check those out. It's a Simpsons Spectacular this month. So yeah, subscribe, hit like, and let's get on to the horror. Issue number 11. Story number 1, The Sub-Basement of Dracula by Marv Wolfman, who co-created Blade, appropriately. Dracula and Renfield are on the prowl. By that I mean Mr. Burns and Smithers, causing all kinds of ruckus with their army of the undead. There's a team on it, led by Homer Harker, with Bart Drake, Lisa Van Helsing, and Carl LeBlade. And, of course, Santa's little killer. They go hard on the vampire hordes harassing Springfield, but it's revealed Mr. Burns has taken Marge hostage. They intervene and save her, but in the end, it was Maggie that Burns was after all. And she's turned into a vampire. Okay, Gene Colan, who did the art, and Marv Wolfman created Blade together, among other things. They also referenced their old characters in the Midnight Suns and Friends, with Frank Drake, Hannibal King, Abraham Whistler, Rachel Van Helsing, and Quincy Harker getting nods here. But beyond that, you can tell these old hands have done this before. This feels like a 70s Marvel horror comic. It is dark and brooding and strange. It has twists and turns, and it's beautiful. It has grit, pulp. You could sink your teeth into this. This is a 180 from having shitty rock stars write your comics. You get classic comic people on it. I love this. Story 2, Squish Thing by Len Wein, co-creator of Swamp Thing and Wolverine. Homer is a shambling thing, barely resembling human, but he has returned home. Inside, though, Moe is trying to woo Marge to no avail. We then get a flashback. Homer is trying to develop a new alcoholic squishy beverage, but thanks to Moe's machinations, Homer is killed, blown up, and thrown into his own concoction. But he isn't dead. He has become the Squish Thing, and no one could love him. Moe arrives late at Marge's with ill intent. He draws a knife, but the Squish Thing attacks. He is strong, virtually unstoppable, and he does Moe in. He recoils after her, but Marge loves him, and she has an idea. For $1, the local kids can drink some of the lime Squish Man, and he is endless. Okay, I thought the last one knocked it out of the park, but this was twice that. I am much more of a Swamp Thing fan than I am a Blade fan, so let's talk about that real briefly. Bernie Wrightson, who did the art on this, co-created Swamp Thing with Len. So again, a classic comic book team here, talking about their classic character, you know, and they also get it. They just get it. They mix the depressing 80s sort of DC comic storytelling with funny moments. When Homer tells Moe his drink tastes like Mountain Dew and sweat socks, Moe goes, "Ew, Mountain Dew, that's nasty." It was just an all-around, really well done. The art, the storytelling, the pacing, the usage of Moe was perfect as someone who has lusted after Marge. We got a kind of retelling of Swamp Thing's origin here, but with that Simpsons edge cut into it well. This gave me a lot of nostalgia of reading the dark, morbid Swamp Thing tales late at night as a kid, or even to this day after a few drinks, the lights off, tucking into some pseudo-philosophical monstrosity from a swamp. I loved this. Story number 3, 2 Tickets to Heck by Chris Bonham and Steve Riggenberg. Chris is a Simpsons writer. Steve Riggenberg did Robin 3000. This is essentially a love letter to old EC horror comics, Tales from the Crypt, Vault of Horror, Shock, Suspense, etc. So we get a series of smaller stories based around that premise. Number 1 is A Quick Way to a Crusty Death. Crusty is a vampire, which we get a good moment where Crusty is reading a book about making things kosher, but the Simpsons kid easily dispatch him. This leads to Bart Simpson, Midget Commando. Bart is in the military. Seems more Blackadder goes forth than anything else. Honestly, Bart is blown to smithereens. And the third one is Shock, Suspense, Simpsons. This one involves the KKK and aliens, and is really a mess. I was hoping for something a little bit more substantial. This was pretty poorly done, and the stories flowed into a real harsh, like, convoluted mess. None of them were very interesting. The art was so-so. I was not really compelled by this, but despite being a huge EC Comics fan. Issue number 12. Story number 1, Homer's Ark by Terry Moore, who did Strangers in Paradise. Homer is struck by lightning and told by old pal God that he needs to build a flying ark, as God is going to spray for roaches. It goes poorly, and God is displeased. It turns Homer into half a roach. I did not like the art. Terry's a talented person, but his take on The Simpsons looked like Hagar the Horrible. It just isn't good. The writing was bad, the story was stupid, and the pacing was all over the place. Really not good. Story 2, Blood Curse of the Evil Fairies by Kyle Baker, who wrote Some Plastic Man. Homer finds a fairy princess who has lost her wand. He intends to use her as fishing bait, but she offers to grant him a wish. But he's too stupid to think of anything, so he puts her in a jar where he considers, and she dies. Other fairies find her and torture Homer until Maggie rights the wrongs. All around, art is grainy and annoying. The story was mediocre. I did really like the ending, so the whole thing is framed as Bart telling Maggie a story, but she falls asleep before the ending, and we find out Nelson is at the window wanting to hear the rest of the story. Beyond that, it didn't do much for me, and painting Homer is far dumber than usual, which is a minor gripe. This one just wasn't for me. Story number 3, Willie, Portrait of a Groundskeeper by Eric Powell, who created the comic The Goon. Quite a good comic. Bart and Milhouse have a Maxim-type magazine. They are interested in the broads. They find a mail order form for macho chest hair in 30 days. So they rip out that portion of the magazine before the magazine is taken by Skinner, Principal Skinner, and given to Willie to burn. Willie gets drunk and thinks he is ordering a mail order bride from the magazine, but it's actually an emu, who he proceeds to sleep with. Well, the bird didn't care for the old Scottish lovings, runs away into the arms of Homer Simpson, who kills and eats it. Willie finds this out, knocks Homer out, kills and eats Marge in front of Homer, but he is then killed by Bart's new chest hair, though the chest hair also kills Homer. So I went into thinking, what can they do with Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer as a parody? And how did Eric knock it out of the park? First off, the art. The Goon has a sort of creepy noir kind of art to begin with, has a real depth and texture to it that is wholly unique to him, and he brought that here. Has a definite creepy vibe. Everyone is almost realistic in a slightly uncanny valley vibe. It gives it this uncomfortable air. Also, the plot. Willie bangs an emu. He kills and eats Marge. Wow, we do get Professor Frink jumping after the emu sex to say how improbable it is to do. So that's nice, but the tone of Henry was here. Willie is an unsettling monster. He's not quite as cold or calculating, but it works. So it's not a fun story, but it was a horrific in so many ways that I really enjoyed it. And it saved this issue, honestly. Issue number 13. Story number 1, Nas, by Brian Posehn and Gary Duggan, who worked on Deadpool together. Brian is also a famous comedian. So as far as plot goes, it was pretty standard Jaws parody, hitting all the points of beach attacks, incompetent government, fake out, then resolution. But I have to say it was exceptionally well done. First off, it used the characters appropriately, especially secondary characters, with Chief Wiggum and Professor Frink being the main ones in this. No, my one real gripe with the characters is that we open on Moe absolutely attempting to essay Edna Krabappel, but that's not out of Moe's character. It was just really odd. Beyond that, the art was good. It was more of a standardish Simpsons art, but it was graphic. Like, they did not really hold back on the violence, but it has this lightness to it, this ridiculous that didn't make it come off as overly gory, even though it was. Lots of good, sharp jokes here. Almost too many, but it wasn't a problem. Trust me, this was well done. Lots of fun. Story number 2, They Draw, by Patton Oswalt, who's a famous comedian. It's Carl's birthday, and Lenny forgot a gift, so he goes into the power plant lost and found, eventually finding some sunglasses. But when he puts them on, he sees the world as it is, a comic book, and notes about all the characters, their motivations, and what they are going to do. He then recruits a legion of sidekicks, including Carl, Comic Book Guy, Frink, and Mole Man, among others, to join their crew, and uses their power to know what's going to happen for their own needs. So first off, the most offensive part of the story was that they want us to believe Lenny didn't remember Carl's birthday. It's absolute fucking nonsense. Impossible. I refuse to accept that even for the sake of plot convenience. Besides that, the good, this is a take on one of my favorite movies, They Live, starring Roddy Piper and Keith David, so that's a plus. The scene where Lenny goes to Carl with the glasses and Carl says he isn't going to have a 6-minute fist fight with you. I love it. That's an obvious reference to the epic fight in the movie. We also get some cool references to other movies than Lost and Found. Lenny finds a tiki torch from Trilogy of Terror. Not a torch, the tiki guy. And a lament configuration from Hellraiser. Beyond that, it was a little disappointing. It was quick. It didn't really go anywhere. I kind of liked the idea, but the execution was a little boring. Story number 3, Prop Whiz Whiz by Ian Boothby, who's a Simpsons comic writer, and Pia Guerrera, who did Y the Last Man. come across Bart looking at cursed items in the comic book guy's store. Apparently, it puts people in the movie the item relates to. Lisa gets transported to Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Bart gets sucked into Evil Dead 2. Miles gets put into Buckaroo Banzai. Homer into Revenge of the Sith, where he becomes Darth Homer. In the end, comic book guy puts himself in Star Trek, finds there's lots and lots of paperwork in the Federation. Okay, first off, Buckaroo Banzai is a film that everyone needs to watch, and is an incredible movie that deserves a sequel, I don't care how many years later. This was fun, but there wasn't much to it. The picks were rather clever and well done. They integrated the character into each of them well, but there isn't much more to say about it. It's just kind of a slideshow putting Simpsons characters into various movie situations, but for that, it was entertaining. Story number 4, The Pygmy Effect by Thomas Lennon, who was in Reno 911, another comedian. Convoluted story about Mr. Burns looking for an elixir made by pygmies to retard the aging process. He finds that Bart looks suspiciously like a pygmy, so he gets help. In the end, they are indebted to Bart, and Burns and Smithers have not totally been eaten, but most of them is eaten. Is pygmy an offensive term? Does anyone know? Let me know down below. It was just fine. I don't know. It felt overly long. We got they draw being shockingly short. This didn't spark me. Though the writing wasn't bad, it just didn't do it for me. Tom Lennon's a funny guy, and there were some funny jokes in this, but overall, pretty flat story. The art was okay. Issue number 14. Story 1, 30 Days of Dough, by Steve Niles, who did 30 Days of Night, and Glenn Fabry from Preacher. This was a generic, uninspired, tepid zombie vampire story where Chief Wiggum is a survivor and eventually the sun cures all, sort of with bad jokes that we've either had ad nauseum before or aren't well written enough to belong in The Simpsons. I also hated the art. Everyone looked like Muppets. Not even vaguely. They looked like Muppets. Glenn, this was not it, brother. Story number 2, Murder He Wrote, by Ian Boothby, Simpsons comic book writer. In a total Uno reversal of the last story, this was a surprisingly well-done take on Death Note. Bart is Light, Lisa is L, and Krusty is Ryuk. I won't recount every point of it, but it has some clever deaths, like Homer accidentally using the Death Note to write his Flanders death fan fiction, and it comes true. Skinner is impaled by his own mother, etc. But the real treasure here is the art. Nina Matsumoto didn't totally capture the Death Note vibes, but she did about as good as she could. It really had a fun look, feel. Every one of the Simpsons looked great. Lisa as Elle was amazing, her hunched in front of her computer. Marge looked good as hell. This was a great story that took the source material and used it really well. Story number 3, Homer Steen Conquers the World, by Gilbert Hernandez from Love and Rockets. Homer becomes a kaiju, and he fights a Godzilla parody and wins, and fights a kaiju similar to him, and well, they fall in love and run away together. My short description of the story may betray the fact that I enjoyed the hell out of this. Gilbert's art was so silly here that it worked. The story was absurd and kept me glued to it. I wish I had a lot more to say about it, but it was just what it was, and that was fun, entertaining, and stupid. Issue number 15, last issue of the week. So this issue is really about showing off cartoonists and giving them a platform. Most of these people are not well known in the comics industry, and I'm not doing a ton of research on random cartoonists. So this will be as surface level as possible. I'm not even sure if I will count some of these on account of how short they are. Story 1, The Call of Vegulu, by Matthew Thurber, who created a character called Mr. Colostomy. He's a cartoonist. A story that I thought was going to be a fun Cthulhu-like one, turned into a meandering tale about late-stage capitalism and profits. I don't like capitalism either, but this was boring as sin. The art was pretty decent, but didn't do anything exciting. I don't know. Meh. Story 2, Mo Buddies, Mo Problems. Guy by Men's Feelings, who's a cartoonist. Mo is looking to expand his female demographic, so thanks to Gil, he makes his own. This was bad and weird. I don't know what they were going for, but it wasn't funny. It was just sad and stupid. Story 3, The Gods Must Be Lazy, by Will Sweeney. He's another cartoonist, like I said. Homer gets eaten by the gods. I think the story was kind of stupid, but I really enjoyed the art. Had a super jail vibe to it that I could kind of get into. I especially loved the lettering, but yeah, another kind of a dud here, save for the art. Story 4, Chum, by John Veramaya, who's an Apple and Onion. Mole Man is a cannibalistic humanoid underground dweller. He kills Rod and Todd, but Ralph makes friends with him. I actually got a huge kick out of this one. The art was delightfully horrific. Had a garbage, pale kids vibe that a lot of modern indie artists seem to draw from. I liked it. This is the only one I've liked thus far in this issue. Story 5, Bootleg, by Ben Jones, who did Axe Cop. So I expected a lot of this one, but Apu takes a shit in panel, and Bart does blackface. I have nothing else to say about this. Story 6, Three Little Kids by John Kirschbaum, who is a Mad Magazine cartoonist. Lots of people get eaten until some bears eat the Simpsons. The art was kind of fun. There was lots of boogers. I mean, these aren't given enough time to breathe, and there's not really a lot of plot going on. Story number 7, Bad Millhouse by Jeffrey Brown, who worked on Star Wars comics. Millhouse is hiding in some walls, killing people like Sherry, Terry, his dad, and Flanders. Eventually he is caught. Fine. It was just fine. I don't know. Everything I told you in the story happened, and that's it. It just occurred. Okay. Story 8, last story of the week, and we're ending on a really bad note. The Slipsons by Christopher Forge, who worked on a comic called Power Masters. I have no idea what to say about this. I have no idea what happened, and I'm not going to dignify it. All right, let's talk about these issues. Number 11, an excellent, and I mean excellent opening here. We got two back-to-back absolute bangers with two classic creative teams that made me nostalgic for good Simpsons, good comics, and Halloween's gone by. The third was very messy and did not do the service to the greatness of things that they were trying to reference. I'm not going to pin too much blame on that story, as it did seem to try, but try as it might, it failed, and especially in the face of the monolithic goodness before it, looked extra awful. Number 12, well, 2/3 shit on this one, and I was thinking it was going to be a total write-off. Then they laid a Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer parody on my doorstep to appreciate. That was one of the most macabre, disturbing stories in the series, and it was so enjoyable because of that. I give them all the credit in the world for looking at the script with bestiality, cannibalism, home invasion, and murder, and not flinching an eye. But I have to wonder what the hell they were thinking with this other nonsense they peddled. Overall, a pretty sad sack of an issue with one big redeeming quality. Moving on to 13. This one kind of surprised me, to be honest. I assumed the Brian Duggan one would be good, considering the duo's work on Deadpool was fairly consistent in quality. But these other ones, while they were not totally great, were all fairly decent in their own right, with, or at least had some concept that worked out. Getting various comedians together for writing projects can be a real recipe for disaster. As you know, that's not their job. But, you know, everyone has loved The Simpsons at one point in their life, and they all seem to do their best here. A decent issue. 14... It started off real rough for me. Honestly, it was like, I gotta slog through this. But then it pulled itself out of its own ass and delivered a fun, manga-like experience, which I didn't really expect from The Simpsons, and a totally absurd story that made me chuckle more than once. I like when I'm surprised by good things, and issues 13 and 14 sure proved to be that. I'm hoping this trend keeps up, because, man, some of these are bangers, and I'm having a good time going through this, in general. 15, this was more of way to get exposure to some of these artists, and for that it's fine. For Halloween special, it was fairly middling. It did some really strange visuals, which was nice, and if we're going by that, then it accomplished its goal. It's all style and no substance here, and well, I think that's what I expected going in, sadly. Yeah, not much to say about this issue. Overall, we got a pretty damn good week here. Overall, if I do say so, with a lot more good than bad. And a lot to praise. I think this is probably the most morbid week art-wise. We got lots of hyper-gory, very graphic visuals that are not something I would normally associate with The Simpsons. And that's in mostly a good way. It's nice to see these characters get a darker, weirder treatment on occasion. And that was this week. That's what we got. Another week, and man, I wish I had more negative things to say that I didn't, but I don't. Let's move right on towards the end, everybody. I just want to say first, thank you, each and every one of you, for being here, for supporting me just by clicking on that link. It means the world to me, and I hope you have a great October Halloween month. So don't forget to come back next week for week 4, around the last 5 of Bart Simpsons Treehouse of Horror comics, before moving on to ranking portion on Halloween. Also, add me on Instagram under Demon Peaks for daily Twin Peaks memes. Here at my Patreon, where you can support this channel for as little as $1, and subscribe. Don't forget that last one. This has been the Eternal Micaiah, Master of Minds and of Men. Thank you very much, and goodbye.